Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Joining us now, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Congresswoman, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So I'm going to start off with let's talk about what's going on, obviously, right now. At any moment, you could be called to the floor for a vote. And there's some indication of what it may be. They're now talking about splitting it up into three different bills. But just give us your sense of what's going on here, because it feels like 5 days ago, nobody predicted there'd be an issue with this.
We were totally fine. Democrats and Republicans had come to a compromise, CR, just government funding bill. And it's actually funny. It kind of came down to literally maybe like a 3-hour window where the schedule in the House, there was 2 vote series. We're supposed to vote at 1:30 and then again vote at 4:30. And so they were going to put this government spending bill that everyone had agreed to on. There's some talk about putting it through at 1:30. Mike Johnson says, you know what, let's just do it at 4. And in that 3-hour window, Elon Musk tweeted. And it died. And then you have Trump threatening, and basically Trump threatened to primary any Republican that voted for a clean CR. And then Elon tweeted that he was threatening to primary anyone that voted for the compromise CR. And Republicans are in this moment where they don't know who their daddy is right now. And so they are just running around like chickens with their head cut off. And so we're literally in this holding pattern because of this. And it's like this recursive loop that is just shut down the government literally out of nowhere because of a tweet. It's actually insane. I
was a product of divorce, so I can understand what happens when mommy and daddy fight and you don't know which side to land on. But putting that aside for a moment, one question I have that does not feel like it's going to be addressed whatsoever is the $20 billion for the IRS. Mm-hmm. This was in the last budget. It was a clawback by the Republicans. But if it's a continuing resolution, it could happen again, sort of as just sort of like I guess inertia. What is anybody talking about that at all?
Well, I think that this is the core problem that they're in right now, which is that, of course, they need Democratic votes to pass this thing. This conference cannot keep themselves together. And so they keep trying to, but they can't. They're too much at war with themselves. And so it is something that is a priority for us. And it's not something that I think has been left aside or forgotten. This is going to be a big battle, though. And it's not going to be the last time we see this come up.
Right.
Because the Trump tax cuts are expiring next year. And this is actually what this fight is actually all about. This is why Elon is involved in this right now, because he's not tweeting this out of nowhere. He's not coming at this out of nowhere. They are trying to lift the debt limit now because reauthorizing the Trump tax cuts next year are going to explode our federal debt. It's going to explode our deficit again. And they don't want to lift the debt limit then to do that. They want to lift it now. That's why
that'll draw too much attention to what their tax cuts are doing. And this way, if they split it up, it's less of a story.
And that's why Elon's getting involved. His net worth has, I believe it's almost doubled since the election. Or it's like, this is what was kind of being discussed a little bit among Democratic talkers. Like they're talking about changes to Elon's net worth since the election. He is trying to further explode his net worth. And he is trying to leverage everything from income from federal contracts to, reducing his own personal expenditures and reducing his taxes. And this is something that we are, this is what this is about for him. Trump has a different set of priorities for himself. he's trying to, line his own pockets and figure out his own political preservation in this moment. And sometimes those things are aligned and sometimes they're not. And I think right now we're in one of those friction points.
It's sort of the definition of an oligarchy where even though these guys aren't these, I mean, even though Trump's not even in office yet, his like billionaire
mob
daddy,
enforcer, basically,
is like controlling whether the government will stay open or not. But let's leave this for a moment because this is an ongoing story. We're going to find out maybe how this is resolved at least for the next like 3 weeks or 2 months. We'll find that out in a moment. But I want to turn to what's been going on this week in terms of your attempt to chair the government oversight committee. And my daughter had a question that sort of dovetails into this. So I told her I would ask this question. She wants to know, and I think sort of these two questions sort of address that whole dynamic. One is if you feel abandoned by the Democratic Party, and how so if you do. But also, she wants to know, how do you grapple with having to appeal to multiple different ideological groups within the Democratic Party and your constituency?
Yeah, well, two really good questions. The first one is that I don't really feel abandoned by the Democratic Party because my primary relationship that I care about the most is mass movements and mass movement politics. And part of my job and my role exists forever in this tension point between mass movements and everyday people and the establishment of the Democratic Party. And so that is always like, as long as I exist as a person, I am going to be in this waypoint between these two forces. And what I'm always trying to do is open the windows of possibility for people in the Democratic Party. And so I don't feel abandoned because my job is not to try to gain personal acceptance. My job is to try to build power for the working class. And so I feel like you have to know when to select your battles and when to force the question. And I ran to win. I always run to win. I don't pick fights that I think are losing from the jump, even if they are long shots. But I also felt like this was a win-win situation. And I felt like it was win-win because you win it in a literal sense. We're able to wield this seat. And I think I genuinely ran because I thought it was what was best for the party. And I think it was what was best for the country. And I think it was what was best for people. And that's why I did it. But I also think that it is clarifying. And sometimes when you force this question, it allows us to take measurements about where we are at. And not in a binary perspective, not just in a binary perspective either. It's not just that we won or that we lost. But even in losing, I don't think anybody in the party thought that it would be this close at the start. This is a race among, by definition, Democratic insiders, only among other members of Congress. And this is typically an environment where people like us get crushed. And the fact that it was this close, the fact that some of the most, established and powerful elements of the party had to mobilize to make, to make this result, happen, that we, people were hot on their heels, I think is a very good sign for us. And so that's the first question, which leads to the second question, right, is that in order for us to win, we need to win along several dimensions. And we need to know how to bring people together and cleave people together in kind of different dimensions in addition to an ideological one. If it's forever just progressives versus the establishment, and that's the only frame, then we are outnumbered. But if we can take that, preserve it, we're not abandoning it, but you add generational dimensions, you add class dimensions, you add some of these other things. This is an exercise in coalition building while preserving the integrity of our positions. And I think this was one of our first big swings at it. And I think as far as that goes, there was a lot of really interesting successes in that. This was not.
So that you mean if we were to look at the votes that you got maybe on the steering committee, and if we were to look at the votes that you got on the floor, we would see you could have obviously progressives voted for you, but then maybe there are younger people who have a different idea of what partisanship looks like. I mean, I think that is a big part of the generational changes. And there may be also some people who run to the progressive positions on economics, but maybe not on immigration, or maybe not on, picket, essentially. Or, I mean, because frankly, there are votes that I know that my daughter and I have talked about, and that we've talked about here, that you've taken that we're not excited about, to say the least, the anti-Semitism one in the most recent. But this is part, or you tell me, is this part of like the idea of there are certain battles where you think are maybe less consequential in the long term that you will sacrifice to build these coalitions for the long term?
I think that we are presently in a moment where we have to be really ruthless about what battles we pick, and we cannot pick all of them. And I think we have to be realistic about the political moment that we are in. There are moments where we have the juice to be bullish, and then there are moments where we need to like really strengthen foundationally and preserve. This was a tough year for us. And it's not just about big money. It's about like organizationally on the left, we are in a challenging time. Just everything that has gone on over the last year, there's a genocide that is happening. And this is rightfully been a focus of so much organizing. And it's also caused a lot of not just internal, I think, questioning, assessment, how we do things on the left, but it's also been a moment where we've had tons of dark money, not just, yes, APAC, also crypto, also Wall Street, all these folks that are constantly waiting to pick us off. And so, I think that for this purpose, when we make sure that we fight like hell on the material things, like I vote consistently on withholding weapons, withholding funding for offensive weapons. When it comes to some of like the finer, second and third degree connections on condemning anti-Semitism, if IHRA came explicitly to the floor, I would not vote to ratify it. But I think that we need to be very strategic. We cannot swing at every single pitch because we have to build. And so I do think, for example, internally, one of my big cases in gaining support, and what is interesting is that the support that we got in this, it was not just like the Progressive Caucus plus the Hispanic Caucus, which were the two caucuses that endorsed me in this fight. We had swing district Democrats that supported me in this. We had New Dems which is a
Pat
more
Ryan, I think, was one of
So
the
that's-
most successful of the swing, sort of the purple districts, as it were. And he, I think, spoke
on your behalf, right?
yes, yeah. And he outran Kamala Harris by the largest margin of any House Democrat. And so one of the things the case that I was making to the caucus is that I can message on an economically populist message. And that is my intention. Of course, we are going to fight on civil rights. We're going to fight on human dignity. We're not going to let Democrats abandon our trans community. We're not going to allow Democrats to try to run skittish on civil and human rights issues. But the selling point, the most alluring point to bring the party together and to bring them over, we have to make a case of persuasion, which is that there is no other place where we are seeing promise to win back the working class, to win back Latinos, to win back young people than right here. And the message that we can send as a party that has been really kind of cemented in this election by Trump, that Democrats are the party of the elite, which bore out in an electorate in terms of what got hemorrhaged. That the way that we counter that is a populist economic message, which in a progressive frame has the benefit of a multiracial democracy, and that is attenuated with that.
Right. And part of why, I was excited about the prospect of you winning that position to be a top Democrat on oversight was because of the fact that you could communicate that kind of thing with a really large megaphone. And I think part of maybe I saw what you did with your followers after the election, some of the voters who voted for you and Trump. Mm-hmm. And, Trump's style of tweeting or truthing or whatever, he's lying all the time, but it at least simulates a level of responsiveness to the public. Yes. So my question is just do you think that the Democrats' message on Trump's threat to democracy was undercut by the fact that an overwhelming number of Americans thought that Biden was too old to run for a second term, and yet there was no real primary process anyway? So I guess in other words, do you think that the Democrats need to build back more trust and legitimacy with their base, democratic legitimacy, by showing more responsiveness? Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's a big part of what our case was as well. I think it's interesting because a lot of people kind of talk about the gerontocracy of the Democratic Party and the way that a lot of these decisions are decided by seniority. And all of those things are true. But what is also attenuated with that is the fact that it is really hard for a lot of, I think, Democrats to wrap their head around the current media environment that we are in. And there's still this really big attachment to the idea that CNN, MSNBC, the op-ed, pages of the New York Times are where swing voters are and where everyday people are. And as we saw from the election, people who, if you ascribe to that kind of a media diet, you are overwhelmingly supporting Democrats. But there has for a very long, and this was actually part of what part of what I was trying to offer the party is also part of what I think had cut against me in this race, which is that there's this idea that having this, not among all Democrats, but I think among more of the old guard, that having that kind of resonance and responsiveness is gauche and lowbrow and unsophisticated. And it's attention seeking. The fact that a person has attention means that they are attention seeking, as opposed to the fact that they are talking to people. And so I feel okay because at the end of the day, I'm going to keep doing that. I am going to continue to do that. I wanted to do it at behest of not just the party for the sake of the party, but because we are on the precipice of a fascist administration coming in.
Right. And your level of partisanship would have been a benefit, right? I mean, it's also about acting partisan with the Republicans and not exceptionalizing MAGA and Trump and saying Trump is the Republicans and the Republicans are Trump.
Right. And so, but I don't think that window has necessarily passed.
Well, time's sort of on your side on some level in this dynamic, right? I mean, we're seeing that develop. I don't know why it develops more quickly on the Republican side, and maybe that's just because they have
a seniority system.
They don't have a seniority system, and they don't even. But even in the context of their media, like they developed, talk radio first. They and they've put a lot more money into the online stuff, and there's an investment there, and they don't seem as reluctant to do that. And just lastly, because I know you got to go, but part of this dynamic of the way that young people are getting their media now, it seems to me, is that what we've seen with Gaza and what's happening with Israel is akin, in my mind, to what happened with the Vietnam War, when we saw for the first time reporters were actually involved in the war. And for people who had more skin in the game, insofar as like I could get drafted or my kids could get drafted, that really changed the politics in a way that I don't think the upper echelon or the old guard, as it were, of whatever was happening at that time in this country understood. And I feel like that same dynamic is happening now. If you're under the age of 40, what's gone on in Israel is in Palestine and Gaza in particular, obviously, and the West Bank for that matter, is very different from your perception if you're over the age of 40 because of where you get your media.
I have said this directly to Democratic leadership. I've communicated this to the White House, that this is our Vietnam. This is our, not just like in terms of the party, but this is just our country's Vietnam. And what I think a lot of people do not yet understand is they think that some of these hemorrhages are maybe ideological. They think maybe it is like an ethnic thing. I don't think there is appreciation yet about how generationally radicalizing this moment is, and how shocked people are at how far just like the general inertia is willing to go, as if we're not seeing what's happening right before our very eyes. I mean, we are now at the point where, where I exist, me calling this a genocide, going to the House floor, delivering a speech saying that the administration is aiding and abetting this is so far beyond the fringe, so far beyond the pale. This is also part of what this dynamic was in this vote too. It came up let's just to call a spade. That was also an element in this fight. But I think that it is important that we lay these markers down again generationally, because people see what is happening, and we need to have some sort of legitimacy if we seek to reinstate an order around human rights and actual care for democracy. And that is the benefit of being of trying to be consistent. And so when I see these losses, they're not devastating to me, because I think they are important waypoints for us to see. It's not just a loss. Like, again, in the context of the Democratic caucus, in the context of a 3-term member of Congress running to become a ranking member of a committee against, someone that has decades of experience here, to gain that waterline of 84 Democrats in an internal fight it is something that people were taken aback by. And we will see, what do we do with that? I don't know. But it is a chip that we have. And we'll have to see other people we can elevate and support and see how all of these things interact. But at the end of the day, it's something that I think was a net gain for all of us to be able to engage in.
Yeah, I suspect that 130 on the other side or so were surprised, and they're, I don't know if put on notice is the right way of putting it, but they're aware that maybe there's something they might be missing. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
And good luck with whatever you end up having to
vote
on
or
today.
against.
Hopefully there is something to vote for, because it makes a material difference for a lot of people that we operate the government. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks.
All right, bye-bye.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.